Hello everyone, I'm bringing you a video today talking about this. Now this is a Second World War era British issue Bergen Rucksack, and the reason for talking about this is I mentioned it in a previous video looking at the 1975 pattern Trials rucksack. I simply mentioned there that the layout of the rucksack in terms of the side pockets, the front pocket and so forth was similar, and that's certainly true. Otherwise the designs are very different. This was of course introduced in 1941 and used throughout the Second World War and used and manufactured post-war as well. And we may well have a look at an example, a post-war example of one of these in a future video as well. That differs in being made entirely of green webbing and canvas, so the straps and so forth are green as well. It's a 1960s dated example, so this design was manufactured at least into the 1960s. They weren't an exclusively British design as well, certainly Australia manufactured them and other Commonwealth countries too. But this is a British example. The issue with this is the date is not clear. I believe it's 1942, but the stamp really isn't clear. It's certainly an earlier example because later war manufactured examples were made of a lighter weight green canvas. This is made of the earlier heavier weight tan canvas, as you can see here. The idea of this video is not really to talk about who used these in any great detail, but I will go over a little bit of the history of the introduction of these. In the run-up to the Second World War, the British Army had been heavily mechanised, much more so than the German Army, of course. And the 1937 pattern web equipment was really supposed to be used with the haversack carried on the back at most. The pack was carried over from the 1908 pattern equipment for changing stations. So you wouldn't generally expect to see troops carrying the pack in the field. The haversack was supposed to be enough, and the rest of the equipment the soldier needed, the greatcoat and so forth, could be carried on motor transport. Now obviously this doesn't work for all troops. Mountain troops in particular need to be able to carry a lot more kit with them. You don't have motor transport up in the mountains, generally speaking. So the Bergen Rucksack was to meet that need for troops who need to carry a much greater bulk of kit with them and can't rely on motor transport to bring up their kit behind them as they advance and as they move. Of course, these were also used extensively by the Commandos, and they're often referred to as Commando Bergens for that reason. And they were used by other specialist troops as well. So that's just a brief overview. As I say, introduced in 1941. I think this particular example dated 1942. And the idea of this video is to have a look at it on the mannequin, packed out as we have it here. And we'll also look at it in some detail on the blanket as well as we normally do. Have a look at the design features we can't see with it on the mannequin. And I'll talk about various fixtures and fittings in a bit more detail in that section of the video as well. The overall design of this is one very large main compartment here, closed with this flap at the top here. You can see the straps closing that flap coming down here, and these are nice and long, so you could carry a load underneath the flap using these as well. We have a central compartment here, which closes with a zip and this flap with two straps and buckles, as you can see there. And then we have the side pockets, which we'll see as we move this round in a minute or two. You also have external stowage with these straps here, and there are fittings we'll see a bit more clearly when we look at this in more detail, where you can attach extra straps to this to carry further equipment. I don't have those straps, unfortunately, something I need to add to the collection at some point going forward. The body of the rucksack itself is made of a heavyweight canvas, and you can see here the edging tape used around all the edges of the flaps and so forth to stop that from fraying. So that's the basic layout of this. The fittings and the straps and so forth are in common with British webbing of the time. So you've got 1-inch straps here in common with what you would see used with the 1937 pattern and the 1908 pattern before it. So the supporting straps for the pack, for example, are basically of the same webbing material as this. The buckles are all standard as well in that regard. And it standardizes basically on 1-inch straps throughout. The brass tips on the end of the straps are a standard feature of British webbing at the time as well. That's the back of this as it's carried, or the front as you're looking at it, of course. We'll start moving this around now and have a look at some of the other details. We'll look at one side, the straps coming over the shoulders, and then we'll have a look at this in a bit more detail. Looking at the left-hand side of this, you can see more detail there of the strap up here, which allows for an external load to be carried. You can see the size of the side pouch there, and that closes with, again, a 1-inch strap and buckle there, as you can see. And you can see a side profile of the frame coming around the hip there, and the shoulder straps coming over the shoulders there as well. And you can see perhaps the leather straps here for attaching the extra straps on the outside. We'll of course see more detail of that when we look at this in more detail in just a moment. But that's the left-hand side. The right-hand side is a mirror image of this, so we won't bother looking at that. We'll move on to have a look at the straps coming over the shoulders and then have a look at this in more detail. And here we can quickly take a look at the shoulder straps coming over the shoulders here. And this is how this is carried. The frame sits round on the hips with the hip pad here, and the shoulder straps support this on the shoulders. There's no waist belt or anything as part of this. That would be a much later development in sort of rucksack design of spreading the weight to the hips with an actual waist belt, which could be fastened. In this instance, it just sits on the hips using the hip pad here, as you can see. We'll move on now to have a look at the various features of this, the way the shoulder straps attach and so forth, and a look at the frame in a bit more detail. So we're going to have a look at this in a bit more detail now. It's rather a bulky item to try and maneuver and keep in shot, so please bear with me. We're going to have a look at the various details we couldn't really look at on the mannequin when we'll have this on the mannequin. So the first thing, of course, is to look at the front of this, or the back as it's worn or carried. And we have the main compartment here, the flap for the main compartment at the top. You can see the detail of the straps coming down there, the edging material and so forth on here, around the edge of the canvas here. You can see there's a thinner canvas used inside, and you have this edging piece around the edge to finish that off and keep everything neat. And you can see details of the main flap there, how it attached at the back with the leather, where the frame fits into the back and so forth. We'll have a look at that in a bit more detail in a moment. And you can see how this is stitched in to bring it into this shape around the top here. It's sort of a pear shape, the main compartment, so it necks in at the top here, and you can see the stitching for that at the top there. You can also see how these straps are reinforced where they attach on there. See that detail of the stitching there on each side. Inside the main flap we have a compartment which closes with a brass zip, which you can see here, and that still works just fine. If we open that up there and get the light in, we bring the light in here. You can see down in there we have a compartment in the flap there. The name WWII written in there as well. And then you have a throat piece which is made of the same thinner or finer canvas material, which you can see there. And then we have the draw cord which draws the neck in, and you can see that here. It's a fairly coarse sort of hemp twine. See that there, the draw cord to tie the neck closed. If we look inside the main compartment here, you can see we have a compartment at the rear there. I'll just bring the light round here so we can see a little bit better inside. And you can see that there we have a separate compartment at the rear, which is sort of portioned off a little bit by having that finer canvas material. You can see some of the leather reinforcement in there as well, for where the buckles attach and so forth. And you can see the shape of the frame showing through at the rear there, the top of the frame. The top of the image rather that you're seeing here. The leather at the top here bears a stamp, and I'll get a still image to show you. You can possibly just see the ink stamp where my thumb is pointing here. We'll get a shot of that, still of that, and put that in here for you to have a look at. It's not very clear, but it is the maker's mark and the inspection stamp, which can be seen in the leather piece at the top there, which reinforces where the frame attaches, of course. You can see the detail of the eyelets around the neck here, where the draw cord pulls the main compartment closed at the top. You can see here the chapes and buckles on the front where the flap buckles down to. Obviously you're left with quite a lot of length on the straps there when this does buckle across. This does buckle down. You've got very long straps, so you can carry a load buckled underneath these straps, of course, so that's a feature of the design as well. We'll leave the flap tucked back. We can lower this down again and have a look at a bit more detail of what's going on at the front here. We have the central compartment on the rear here, and you can see how deep that is. It's a couple of inches deep. Again, closing with two straps and buckles, and you can see the leather reinforcement there where the straps attach onto the flap of this. So those buckle down like that through the buckles here on the front. This also has a brass zip, which you can see here. Again, the manufacturing quality of this particular bit of kit is fantastic. Just the quality of the way it's been put together, the stitching and so forth, is very, very impressive, especially given some later designs. You can see there's a leather pull at each end of the zip to assist in dealing with that, manipulating it. See that there? And while we've got the rucksack turned this way around, we'll have a look underneath here as well. You have these lower straps, which, as you can see here, have passed around the frame and through the leather keepers here, leather loops on the bottom of the central compartment on the front there. And these, of course, can be used to carry a rolled load underneath the base of the rucksack. And as you can see here, the brass tips on the ends of those straps, they are fixed in position with rivets and these leather pieces on the bottom here, which are obviously stitched in position as well, as you can see. There were also removable straps, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. I don't have those, unfortunately, but there were straps that could be used on the side. We'll turn this over and have a look at the back, and then we'll have a look at the side pouches as well. And we'll talk a little bit more about the straps and the external carriage as well. So looking at the back of this, or the section which is against the back when it's carried, you can see here the details of the frame and the shoulder straps. The top here we have a leather section into which the top of the frame fits. So you can see the metal frame coming up underneath here. It goes into that leather section at the top, and that carries the weight of the rucksack from the top. You have a chrome D-ring worked into that with a rivet here at the top, as you can see, with a leather shape there to attach that. And then passing down through that, you have leather straps. Now if I turn this strap over a little bit here, bring it into shot if I can, you can see the leather strap stitched to the webbing strap here passes up through this section of leather, out the top, and then buckles onto the shoulder strap where it loops back underneath. So that's how the shoulder straps are attached at the top, is via this leather strap and buckle, which you can see there. So it passes through the leather, around the frame, and then buckles back to this buckle, and that secures the shoulder straps there. You can see at the rear here, the shoulder straps run down, across the top here, basically between the shoulder blades when this is carried high on the shoulders, down, and then there are stitched loops here where it attaches onto the frame at the bottom, as you can see there. So hopefully you can see that clearly enough here. It passes around the base of the frame. The shoulder straps, when they pass up and round here, they then come down over the shoulders, of course, and they run down to these leather straps at the bottom here, which can be adjusted using these buckles which attach onto the frame at the bottom. You can see that on both sides there. So brass single prong buckles there, and you can see there are a series of holes in the end of the strap to allow that to be adjusted in. On the front of the shoulder straps you have these chapes with, well, you can see there, the brass ends on them, and these are actually intended, or the initial intention of these was to allow you to carry the utility pouches on the shoulder straps of this. So you could use the captive strap wrapped around the chest and then actually carry the weight of the utility pouches on the shoulder straps of the rucksack, which obviously counteracts some of the weight of the rucksack. That was the initial intention of these. That's the idea behind this part of the design. You have a hip pad here, as you can see, and this is formed from a piece of webbing, which is then reinforced with leather at each end, where it actually attaches onto the frame of the rucksack, and you can see the frame coming across at the bottom here. So you have a cross piece up here and then another cross piece down here at the bottom as well. And down here, the frame, get this round to the side here and just bring the light in. You can see the shape of the frame there, the way the metal works. You have a reinforcing piece that comes out here to strengthen the section of the frame which wraps around the hips. You can see that there. We have a look at the leather work at the side here. You can see how the frame attaches onto the body of the rucksack. You have a stud here and this leather work which is sewn onto the base of the bag of the rucksack there, and you can see that is actually bifurcated and then stitched on here and here at the bottom there. You can also see here how the straps, the shoulder straps, attach on to the end of the frame here. They're actually, that leather section is riveted in place using the same rivets used to attach this stud, which attaches the shoulder strap there. And also that, if we show on this side here, if I can bring the light in again, let's see if I can show this clearly enough. You can see the rivets passing through that leather section there, which attaches the hip pad onto the frame as well, as you can see there. So the bag is removable, but the shoulder straps, for at least the hip pad and the shoulder straps, are captive to the frame. In terms of the actual design, you can't remove the shoulder straps entirely from the design. Obviously they're stitched on at this end. You could unbuckle this end of them, but they are captive to the frame because of the way this loop is stitched over at this end, and the same is true of the hip pad. So that's the frame of this. We'll have a look at the side pouches now and the straps provided for extra carriage on the side of the rucksack. So we'll take a look at the side of this now, and what I've tried to do here is squash it down as much as possible in this direction to bring the right hand side into view. It's a very bulky item to get in shot, as I say, but I think we'll be able to look at the various features here without too much trouble. So the first thing, of course, is we have a side pocket, which you can see here, and these are quite a decent size, and they close with a single strap and buckle. You can see the buckle there, and then the strap coming down there, and the flap is sort of stitched to give a box lid, as you can see over there, again with the edging tape as we've seen on the rest of the design there. No zip in this instance, it's just an open compartment at the top there, and you can see here, this is faded over the years, but you can see a better idea of what the colour would originally have been there. So it has lost a bit of colour on the outside and got a little bit dirty and so forth, a little bit soiled over the years, but you can see slightly better, something closer to the original colour of this there. So that's the side pocket, and obviously the other side is basically a mirror image of this, so we'll have a look at this side and you can extrapolate across to the other side. I mentioned the removable straps earlier. These two leather loops here would allow for the attachment of the removable straps, which would obviously allow you to carry an extra load down the side of the rucksack here, between the side pouch and the pouch found across the front of this, or the back of this as it's carried. So you could carry something rolled up with the straps looped around it using these here, and there are exactly the same fittings on the other side of the rucksack, as you can see here. You see those there. So they allow for a little bit of extra load to be carried on the outside using those removable straps, which I unfortunately don't have examples of. But I do keep an eye out for those from time to time, and I'm sure I will find some at some point in the future. Above the side pouch here, so this is just above the flap set on the side, there is a fixed 1-inch strap which can be used to carry a load on the outside. And this is really quite long. I have it knotted here for neatness sake, but if I open this up, you can see it's a decent length of strap there, and this could be used to carry all sorts of things strapped to the outside of this. So the carrying capacity of the rucksack, considering there's one of these on the other side as well, it really is pretty good for the time period. The amount of kit you could carry in these was really quite impressive, given the sort of standard equipment that was typical at the time. For example, the pack used with which had originally been used with the 1908 equipment, and then of course was carried across for use with the 1937 pattern. This is much, much better for operations where you're having to carry a lot of kit, which is obviously why it found favour with the Commandos, and obviously with mountain troops as well. The intention of this obviously being to give you the carrying capacity necessary for operations in environments or in situations where you're going to be removed from resupply and so forth for prolonged periods, or you're otherwise going to be carrying specialist equipment, for example, during commando raids. So that's a look at the details of this, obviously in conjunction with looking at it on the mannequin. Hopefully that's given you a good idea of the various features of this, and obviously some of the construction details and so forth as well. So I do hope you found it interesting looking at this. What I've tried to do in this video is really show you the nitty-gritty of the detail of the construction, the way the shoulder straps attach and so forth. One of the reasons for doing that is there are a lot of post-war manufactured copies of this, basically, a lot of which actually use reclaimed web equipment, webbing straps and so forth, and they obviously often have wartime dates visible, and sellers often sell them as wartime Bergen rucksacks, when of course they aren't. They're simply made to this pattern using wartime webbing, but made post-war from surplus materials, basically. Some of these were pressed into use post-war, sold off post-war for use as well. They were very popular as a hiking rucksack. And you can see an example of that on the flap here. Actually, you've got a patch of glue there where I assume some sort of badge has been added in typical sort of walking fashion of the time. That's been removed from there. I haven't been able to improve on the glue there. I've tried gently sort of applying a little bit of heat there and trying to remove the glue, but I haven't really got very far. But it doesn't detract too much from this. It's a nice thing to have in the collection, certainly. So I do hope you found it interesting looking at this, as I say. If you have and you'd like to see more of this sort of thing, please do consider subscribing to the channel if you haven't already. And whether you're newly subscribing or you've previously subscribed, please do make sure you hit the little bell, the notification button down below. That will of course alert you when I upload future videos. If you really like my uploads and you would like to support the channel, you can. Both Patreon and PayPal are linked down below. And as always, a massive thank you to everybody who supports the channel using those two methods. It really is greatly appreciated. As I always say, thank you all very much indeed. If you'd like to follow the channel on social media, you can. Facebook, Instagram and Twitter are all linked down below. And if you'd like to get in touch but you don't really use social media, there is of course an email address down there as well. That's everything for this video. So until next time, bye for now.